The industrial vacuum hummed like a distant storm as Malik slid it across the polished wooden floor of the dojo. Every morning before sunrise, he arrived at West Point Martial Arts Academy to mop sweat, wipe mirrors, scrub toilets, and empty bins filled with protein bar wrappers. By the time the first white belts walked in for warm-ups, the place sparkled. No one ever asked who did it. Malik didn't mind. At least that's what he told himself. The students, mostly white and upper-middle class, passed him like air. Occasionally a nod, rarely eye contact. To them, he was the quiet janitor with dark skin and silent shoes. But every night, when the last kick echoed off the walls and the final student left, Malik would pause near the practice mats. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let his fingers trace the edge of the mat, like muscle memory seeking something it had long ago been told to forget. He moved like someone who knew discipline, not like someone who merely cleaned its byproducts. The main instructor, Master Russo, was a respected 6th-degree black belt who often boasted about training champions. He never spoke to Malik beyond functional grunts. Still, Malik studied every class from the sidelines, soaking in technique, posture, rhythm, not with curiosity, but with recognition. One student in particular enjoyed performing. Chase Whitmore. 26, loud, cocky, and the only black belt who treated the mats like a catwalk. He spoke louder than necessary, flexed after every drill, and regularly reminded people of his family's country club connections. "You ever done martial arts, old man?" Chase once asked, tossing a used towel at Malik's feet during cleanup. "No, sir," Malik replied, deadpan, picking it up silently. He had learned long ago that underestimation was sometimes the most dangerous weapon of all. But the comment that changed everything came 3 weeks later, after a seminar on adaptive defense. Chase had just finished overpowering a newer student and was flush with ego. He spotted Malik sweeping near the lockers and smirked. "Hey, Mr. Clean," Chase called out, waving to get the class's attention. "How about a quick spar, just for fun?" A few students laughed. Others froze, unsure whether this was a joke or a challenge. Malik looked up slowly. His hands still on the broom, eyes unreadable. "I don't fight," he said quietly. "That's okay," Chase grinned. "I'll go easy on you." The dojo broke into muffled laughter. Some encouraged it. Others looked away. Master Russo didn't intervene. Neither did the assistant coaches. It was one of those moments where silence gave permission. Chase stepped onto the mat and tossed a pair of gloves toward Malik. "Come on, just one round." No hard feelings. Malik looked at the gloves, then at the faces watching him. The mockery, the arrogance. He sighed, set down the broom, and took off his janitor jacket. Beneath it was a simple black compression shirt and weathered track pants. His body wasn't bulky like Chase's, but lean, sinew built for economy of motion. He moved to the center of the mat with measured steps. Chase bounced on his heels, still grinning. "All right, let's make it interesting. 1 round, no points." "Just flow." Malik said nothing. Then they bowed. The moment his head dipped and rose, Malik's entire body shifted. No more hesitation, no more apology. In a single breath, the air changed. The crowd went quiet. Chase launched first. A fast jab and follow-up kick, textbook sport karate. But Malik wasn't there. He slipped under the strike, pivoted around the kick, and tapped Chase's shoulder with open fingers. Not a strike. A warning. Another flurry came, this time harder. Chase grunted, trying to dominate. But Malik caught his wrist mid-swing and stepped in, redirecting his force with clinical ease, placing Chase flat on his back with a soft thud. It wasn't flashy. It was devastating. For the first time, Chase's smirk faltered. He got up, angry now. "What style is that?" someone whispered from the sideline. Chase attacked again, a series of spinning kicks. Malik evaded each one like water avoids a knife. And when Chase's balance broke, Malik swept his leg with such grace that the dojo's silence shattered into gasps. Chase hit the mat harder this time, sweat on his brow, confusion on his face. Malik stood over him, still breathing steady. "I think that's enough," he said. Chase didn't respond. He just sat there, blinking, the room echoing with the sound of his ego cracking. Master Russo stepped forward. His face was pale. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. Malik glanced at him. "I used to compete," he said, "a long time ago." "Name?" Russo asked, eyes narrowing. "Malik Darrow." The silence was thick enough to cut. Someone in the back let out an audible gasp. A younger instructor pulled out his phone and started typing. In less than a minute, he looked up. Malik Darrow, National Lightweight Champion, 1994 to 1997. Retired suddenly. No public reason. All eyes turned. Russo's face turned from curiosity to discomfort. "I remember that name," he muttered. "They said, you disappeared." Malik looked at the mat, then at the stunned students. Some were whispering, others stared at him like they had never truly seen him before. "I didn't disappear," he said. "I was erased." The weight of that sentence settled over the room like a fog. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that turn pain into power. Malik didn't expect applause. He didn't want it. When he stepped off the mat, silence followed him like a shadow. Not reverent, more stunned, disoriented. The air in the dojo had thickened, like the atmosphere after lightning strikes. He reached for his janitor jacket slowly, pulling it over his shoulders with the quiet dignity of a man used to covering up things others didn't want to see. Chase sat on the mat longer than he needed to, eyes fixed on the floor, ego smoldering in pieces. Around him, students whispered Malik's name as if invoking a ghost, a champion no one knew they'd been walking past every morning. But Master Russo didn't move. His arms were crossed tightly, a frown tugging at the corners of his lips. The name Malik Darrow triggered something he had buried years ago, something administrative, something political. "Class dismissed," Russo said abruptly. "We'll resume drills tomorrow." Nobody protested. They filtered out in uneasy clumps, stealing glances at Malik as they passed. Some offered hesitant nods. One bowed. Malik didn't return it. In the locker room, Chase stared into the mirror, sweat drying on his brow, pride fractured. For the first time in years, he felt humiliated, not by defeat, he'd lost before, but by the fact that no one had warned him, that the man he mocked, dismissed, laughed at, had just dismantled him without anger or effort. His fists clenched. Outside, Malik had already returned to work. He was spraying down the hallway tiles with his mop bucket and pressure wand. It was as if nothing had happened, but everything had. An hour later, as dusk began to blanket the city, Malik finished his shift and walked the 6 blocks home to his small basement apartment. His knees ached, not from the sparring, from years of crouching, lifting, carrying, from the weight of being overlooked. He lived in quiet corners, both of buildings and of memory. In the apartment, the walls were lined with old newspaper clippings, yellowed and curling. Malik Darrow dominates national championship. Rising star of mixed-style martial arts. Black belt with a scholar's mind. And then the headline stopped. 1998. Nothing after that. In the bottom drawer of a dusty cabinet sat his last GI. Black, soft, creased from years of disuse. Folded next to it was an envelope aged at the edges with an official letterhead. "Dear Mr. Darrow, we regret to inform you that due to sponsorship restructuring, your contract with the National Martial Arts League has been terminated effective immediately." It was signed by 3 men, all white, one of whom was now sitting on the board of West Point Academy. Malik had kept the letter not for nostalgia, but as a reminder. They had taken his name off tournament circuits. They'd stripped his credentials under the guise of policy changes, and when he tried to fight back, they'd blackballed him. Informally, quietly, efficiently. He applied to dozens of gyms afterward, all ignored. No one said it aloud, but he knew. A black man with too much skill and too much self-possession made some people uncomfortable. He never stopped practicing. but he stopped competing. Cleaning was the only job he could get that kept him close to the world he loved. So he became invisible inside it. The next morning, Malik arrived early as usual, but something was different. On the front door of the academy was a notice, "Private meeting, no classes today." Inside, the mats were already rolled back. Chairs formed a semicircle around the center. At the front stood Russo, arms folded. Next to him, surprisingly, was another man, older, Japanese-American, wearing a plain navy blazer and white slacks. Malik recognized him instantly. Sensei Hiro Tanaka, former head coach of the International Dojo Federation, retired for nearly a decade, a legend in the community, and the last instructor who had treated Malik like more than a token. Tanaka smiled faintly and gestured toward a chair. "I asked them to call you," he said. "They needed reminding." Malik remained standing. He didn't like where this was going. Russo cleared his throat. "We've reviewed your history, Mr. Darrow. Your credentials were overlooked." "Erased," Malik corrected. Tanaka nodded. "Yes, and that must change." From a leather folder, Tanaka withdrew a sheet and handed it to Malik. An official reinstatement certificate, full recognition of his 5th-degree black belt rank, signed by the International Martial Arts Federation. Retroactive. Malik stared at it. "This isn't for show," Tanaka said. "It's an invitation. We want you to take over as head instructor for the new equity program. Teach advanced students." "Mentor, redefine what this place stands for." Russo looked uncomfortable. "This wasn't my idea," he admitted, "but the board agrees. After yesterday, it's clear the academy has to evolve." Malik handed the certificate back. "I didn't do it for your approval," he said. "We know," Tanaka replied. "That's why you're the right one." Later that week, a new name was added to the West Point faculty wall. Sensei Malik Darrow, head instructor, adaptive systems and combat philosophy. Chase came to class the next day. Quieter, humble, he bowed deeply before stepping on the mat. Malik accepted it with a silent nod. No lectures, no gloating, just instruction. Power had shifted, not through violence or rage, but through undeniable excellence, and the dojo would never be the same again. The first time Malik stepped onto the mat as Sensei Darrow, the entire energy of the dojo shifted, not in sound, but in silence. The air was tight, uncertain. Eyes followed him differently now, some with reverence, others with veiled resentment. Change had arrived in a pressed black GI and well-worn barefoot steps. He bowed slowly, and when he rose, he didn't speak right away. He let the silence sit. "Technique," he finally said, "without humility, is just noise." No one moved. "I won't teach you to win fights," Malik continued, pacing slowly in front of the line of students. "I will teach you how to stop needing to prove who you are, because your presence alone will say everything." Some glanced at each other. Others looked down. Chase stood in the back row, no more jokes, no more cocky smirks. He was watching, listening. Malik's first lesson wasn't a kata. It wasn't a drill. It was a question. "What do you fear most when you're on the mat?" They were stunned. No instructor had ever asked that. "Getting hit," one said. "Losing in front of others," another admitted. "Not being taken seriously," said a smaller girl with braces and a hesitant voice. Malik nodded at each answer. "Fear is not your enemy," he said. "It's your shadow. You don't destroy it. You move with it." Then he showed them what that looked like. For the next hour, Malik demonstrated patterns of movement that weren't in their curriculum. Not because they were forbidden, but because they had been forgotten. Styles drawn from capoeira footwork, Wing Chun deflection, judo rebalancing, all flowing through his limbs like a language no longer spoken. They watched, hypnotized. It wasn't just that he was skilled. It was that his body moved like it remembered everything it had ever survived. In the locker room after class, the conversations buzzed. "Where did he train?" "I looked him up. He should have been on the Olympic team." Why would someone like that mop floors? Chase stayed silent. He sat on the bench, hands on his knees, staring into a space he couldn't name. That night, Russo called a private meeting with the board. The dojo's parent company, Marshall Core Athletics, had already received hundreds of messages on social media after someone posted the clip of Malik dismantling Chase. The caption had read, "When a black janitor humbles a black belt, you don't just watch, you learn." The video had gone viral. By morning, Malik's name was trending among martial arts forums. Stories surfaced. Former students he'd trained in secret years ago spoke out. One, now a Marine close combat instructor, tweeted, "Everything I know about control, I learned from Malik Darrow. He taught me in a church basement, paid him in sandwiches." The public attention made some board members nervous. Others saw opportunity. Russo, however, was conflicted. For years, he had pushed Malik's applications aside quietly. There had been no policy against hiring him, just a cultural code, unwritten, unspoken, effective. He remembered the early 2000s when Malik came in with pristine certifications and requested to observe classes. Russo nodded politely, then filed his resume under maybe. He told himself it wasn't personal, it was just business. Now, that decision sat like a stone in his throat. Back in the dojo, Malik's presence changed more than the classes. Students began arriving early, staying late. The atmosphere softened. Less chest thumping, more questions, more listening. He renamed the advanced group the Listening Circle. When asked why, he said, "Because most of you never really learned to hear your own bodies, or each other." The students laughed awkwardly, but they stayed. One evening after class, Chase approached him. "Sensei, may I ask you something?" Malik nodded. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were when you first got here?" Malik wiped down the mat slowly, finishing the last stroke before speaking. "Because if I had, it wouldn't have mattered." Chase shifted, uncomfortable. "They would have still seen a black janitor pretending to be a fighter. They needed proof. You gave it to them." Chase winced. "I was an ass." Malik raised an eyebrow. "You were a mirror." Chase looked puzzled. "You showed them what they were used to seeing, confidence without knowledge, status without humility. And when that was tested, they had to confront what real mastery looks like." Chase looked away, ashamed. "Do you hate me?" he asked. Malik didn't answer immediately. Then softly, "I don't carry what doesn't belong to me." The words hit harder than any punch Chase had ever received. Over the following weeks, Malik instituted new standards. Everyone, regardless of belt, had to spend 2 weeks training with beginners. All instructors had to participate in community outreach sessions in underserved neighborhoods, and the dojo had to provide scholarships to students who couldn't afford dues. Some parents pushed back. One sent an email complaining, "This isn't a charity, it's a discipline-based academy." Malik responded with a single sentence. "Discipline means nothing if it only exists inside expensive walls." Tanaka backed him, publicly. Slowly, the culture shifted. A local news outlet ran a story, "From Broom to Black Belt, the quiet revolution of Malik Darrow." The story highlighted not just Malik's past, but the present transformation of West Point, a dojo where true power no longer came from rank or pedigree, but from grace, control, and the courage to reclaim space without apology. On a Saturday morning, a little boy with dark skin and bright eyes stood at the door of the academy, clutching a flyer. "Are you the guy who beat the black belt?" he asked Malik. Malik crouched down, smiling. "No," he said. "I'm the guy who helped him learn." The boy grinned. "I want to learn too." Malik opened the door. "Then let's begin." It was the 4th Saturday since Malik's official appointment, and the dojo no longer felt like the same place. The mirrors were cleaner, yes, but more than that, the air had lost its weight. The quiet hierarchy that used to hover over the mats like smoke had started to thin out. What replaced it wasn't loud or revolutionary. It was something far more dangerous to the old order. Respect earned from the ground up. That morning, Malik arrived early as usual. He always did. Habit. He still swept the entry hallway himself, even though the academy now offered him a private office and a staff assistant. When asked why, he simply replied, "I don't unlearn gratitude." The doors opened at 8 a.m. sharp. Among the students filtering in was the boy from the week before, Darius, now in a crisp white G, sleeves a little too long, eyes even wider than before. Malik smiled. "You remember what I said?" The boy nodded. "To begin." "Good. Then come help me set up the cones." Chase arrived a few minutes later, wearing a blue belt instead of black. The change wasn't symbolic. It was intentional. After a long conversation with Tanaka and Malik, Chase requested to step back and retrain under the new curriculum. No announcements, no theatrics, just action. Some students raised eyebrows, others followed. It wasn't just Chase. One by one, a quiet shift began. Students who used to seek dominance now started seeking understanding. Those who once competed for position now volunteered to teach beginners. The dojo became something else, not softer but deeper, but not everyone welcomed the change. One afternoon, a man in a charcoal-gray jai with blood-red embroidery appeared at the door during a private instructor seminar. His name was Jared Sloan, former competitive sparring champion, known for his brutalist approach to martial arts. He had trained Chase privately for years before West Point. Malik didn't flinch. He recognized him immediately. "I hear the janitor's running the show now," Jared said, his voice echoing across the mats. "Guess it's true what they say. Standards are slipping everywhere." Some instructors stiffened. Others looked away. "I came to reclaim what you stole," Jared added, his tone acidic. "My student, my dojo." Malik took a single step forward. "Funny. I don't remember taking anything that didn't want to leave." Jared's jaw clenched. "You don't belong in this space. You never did. That's why they pushed you out 20 years ago." The words were meant to wound, but Malik stood motionless, unshaken. "That may be true," he said quietly, "but here I am." Jared's eyes narrowed. "Then let's do it the old way. You and me, on the mat. No cameras, no applause, just truth." Malik didn't blink. "No." The crowd murmured. Jared smirked. "Afraid?" "I don't spar for ego," Malik replied. "And I don't perform for ghosts." Jared laughed harshly. "You can dodge me all you want. But we both know who you were, and we both know what you could have been, if you'd played the game." Malik turned to the students watching. Some looked confused, others quietly devastated. "I did play the game," he said, meeting Jared's eyes again. "And then I realized it was rigged." A hush fell over the room. "I'm not here to reclaim what I lost," Malik continued. "I'm here to rebuild what was taken from everyone who never got to begin. From every student who was told their silence wasn't discipline but weakness. From every black or brown belt that was seen as a quota instead of a teacher." He paused. "If you want the old dojo back, you can have it. But this mat, this space, belongs to something bigger now." Jared turned to leave, but not before spitting his final words over his shoulder. "This place used to create champions." Malik didn't follow. "It still does," he whispered. "Just not the kind you're used to." That night, Malik found himself sitting in the empty dojo after hours. Lights low, mats still warm from the day's movement. He held an old photograph in his hand. It showed a much younger version of himself, barefoot, grinning, arms around two teammates. Both had quit martial arts long ago. One had been told he was too aggressive. The other? Too undisciplined. He traced the edge of the photo with his thumb. They were never too anything. They were too black, too honest, too excellent in ways the system didn't know how to reward. The next morning, he arrived earlier than usual. Waiting for him at the front door was a woman in her 40s clutching a weathered brown envelope. Her name was Sonia King, a former student from a rival school. She looked nervous. "I saw the video," she said. "Then I saw your name." She handed him the envelope. Inside were old photos, newsletters, and handwritten notes from their shared tournament years. Articles about Malik's sudden exit from the circuit. Some had been blacked out with pen. Others showed names erased, edited, rewritten. "I kept them," she said. "Didn't know why, but I think I do now." Malik nodded. "History doesn't disappear," he said. "It just waits for someone to remember." They walked into the dojo together. That afternoon, Malik held a new seminar, not on technique, but on martial arts history. He spoke about black martial artists who had been erased from the books, about women whose titles were never recorded, about indigenous styles absorbed but never credited. The students sat in silence, some with tears in their eyes. He ended with one sentence: "We don't just teach movement, we teach memory." And from that day on, every Friday class ended with 5 minutes of history. One name. One forgotten pioneer. One chance to remember. The dojo was no longer just a school. It was a reckoning. The mats no longer echoed just with impact. Now they breathed history. Every week, new students trickled in, some drawn by the viral video, others by word of mouth, many simply searching for a place that felt honest. For the first time in the Academy's 2-decade history, the student roster showed balance: white, black, Latino, Asian. Children from working-class neighborhoods now trained alongside the sons of CEOs. The scholarship program Malik implemented had opened doors once bolted shut, but with transformation came friction. One Thursday evening, Malik found himself face-to-face with Greg Matthews, a longtime West Point member whose daughter had been a student since she was 6. Greg was in his late 40s, fit in that manicured suburban way, with a crisp polo and a jaw that always looked clenched. "I'm just saying," Greg said, arms crossed as he stood in Malik's office, "that this place had a certain culture, a standard, and now it's unrecognizable." Malik looked up from the attendance report. "Unrecognizable how?" Greg scoffed. "We're spending time on lectures, talking about oppression, about people who... that's not martial arts. That's politics." Malik folded his hands. "You think discipline exists outside history?" Greg rolled his eyes. "I think martial arts should be about skill, not guilt." There it was, the coded frustration, the discomfort masked as nostalgia. Malik knew the pattern. He'd lived under its weight. "I see," Malik said, voice calm. "So when the previous instructors ignored working-class students, when they failed to correct bullying during drills, when they denied transfer credits to students from community centers, that wasn't political." Greg's mouth opened, then closed. "I don't teach guilt," Malik continued. "I teach clarity. Clarity about what we inherit when we bow to a system that only values certain bodies, certain voices." Greg shifted his weight. "I pay good money for this academy. I want my daughter to learn from champions, not janitors who give speeches." Malik stood up slowly. The room cooled. "Then I suggest you look for another school." Greg blinked. "Excuse me? You came here to threaten the culture we're building. You can leave the same way." There was no yelling, no security, just silence. Greg left. The door closed behind him with a thud that echoed longer than expected. Later that night, Malik sat with Tanaka, sipping tea after hours. "Was I too harsh?" he asked. Tanaka smiled. "In 1973, I was told to change my name to Harry if I wanted to teach in Chicago. I refused, lost the position." Malik nodded. "Truth costs," Tanaka said. "You're just deciding what price you're willing to pay." That Saturday, something unexpected happened. A woman named Olivia arrived at the dojo, petite, mid-30s, with box braids and a calm presence. She held her daughter's hand tightly, a shy, freckled girl with oversized glasses and a stare that was more curiosity than fear. "We saw the video," Olivia said. "I've been searching for a school that wouldn't treat my daughter like a shadow." Malik welcomed them personally. A few hours later, after the beginner class, Olivia approached him again. Can I ask you something? Of course. You used to compete, right? I did. What stopped you? Malek hesitated. Politics, prejudice, power. She nodded, as if she already knew the answer. Then she added, I'm glad you're still here. That afternoon, Darius, the boy from earlier, asked Malik a new question. Sensei, were you ever scared? Malik looked at him seriously. I was scared when I stopped being seen. Darius frowned. What do you mean? When I walked into places and no one looked me in the eye. When I knew more than the man on the mat but still had to sweep under his feet. When I realized they didn't see a fighter, just a body doing work they didn't want. The boy was quiet. But you see me now, Malik added, and that means I don't need to fight for visibility. I need to fight to make sure you never go invisible. Meanwhile, Chase was transforming in his own way. One afternoon, he approached Malik with a binder of old West Point applications. He had been reviewing the Academy's admission data from the past 10 years. Out of 320 applicants rejected over the last decade, Chase said, flipping through pages, 81 were from black applicants with advanced ranks. 53 were from Latino applicants. 17 from indigenous fighters. Only 9 were white. He looked up. They weren't just ignored. They were filtered out. Malik said nothing. He just turned the page. There, stapled to the back, was a copy of his own original application. Date, 2005. Rejected with no reason listed. I don't know how to fix this, Chase said, eyes lowered. You don't, Malik replied. You just stop pretending it never happened. Then you start again. Better. At the end of that week, Malik posted a new quote on the Academy's bulletin board. The mat doesn't remember your belt color. It remembers your honesty. No signature. Just the words. And students began writing beneath it, adding their own stories, fears, confessions. I used to think toughness was being loud. I laughed when others were excluded. I didn't realize I was next. I saw a black belt sweep the floor and thought he was the help. Now I know he was the foundation. Every Friday a new story appeared. Every Monday Malik read each one. He never responded aloud, but his classes did. The movements were cleaner, the focus sharper, the laughter real. Because they were no longer just learning martial arts. They were learning who they were without the masks. On a chilly Monday morning, Malik received a letter in the mail, not an email. A real, creased paper letter in a cream-colored envelope with an international return address. He recognized the logo immediately. The International Martial Arts Preservation Society, headquartered in Kyoto, Japan. The letter was brief but formal. Dear Mr. Darrow, we have recently reviewed documentation regarding your competitive history, as well as observed the evolution of West Point Academy under your leadership. We would like to formally invite you to present at this year's Global Heritage Summit in Tokyo. Your seminar, if accepted, will open the conference. Topic: The Invisible Masters. Malik read the letter twice, then a third time. His hands trembled, but not with excitement, with a mixture of disbelief and something more ancient. Vindication. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small wooden box in his apartment. A box labeled simply, "They tried to erase me." That evening he arrived early at the dojo. He stood alone on the mat, breathing, letting the floor hold him. Then he began to move. Not as a teacher, not for a class, just for himself. His body flowed through forms he hadn't practiced in 20 years. Ancient kata, southern mantis footwork, capoeira escapes learned behind closed doors from black instructors who never got belts, but bled knowledge into him with every motion. It was during this flow, this personal resurrection, that Tanaka walked in quietly and watched from the doorway. You kept it all, the old master said softly. Malik didn't stop moving. Not everything. Some of it I buried. You buried it intact. Malik finished the form, exhaled, and stood still. They're asking me to teach at the Global Summit, he said without turning around. Tanaka nodded. Then teach, not just them, us. This whole generation. The next day, Malik began preparing his presentation, but not with slides or academic jargon. He pulled out old VHS tapes, converted grainy footage, made phone calls to former fighters who now worked as janitors, barbers, nurses, truck drivers. He asked for their stories, for photos, for voice recordings. One by one, they responded. I remember when they told me I wasn't telegenic enough for sponsorship. They made me spar the biggest guy in every tournament, just to prove I could belong. I stopped showing up because no one looked at me when I walked in. Malik wove their voices into a short documentary that he titled The Invisible Masters. A week before the summit, something unexpected happened. A man named Devin Wallace, a documentary filmmaker, emailed Malik requesting an interview. He'd seen the viral dojo video and wanted to explore stories of racial erasure in martial arts culture. We never hear about black martial arts legends, he said on the call. We hear about Bruce Lee, about Chuck Norris, but what about the others? What about the janitors who were once kings? Malik agreed. The interview took place in the dojo, after hours, under warm light, with mats rolled up and chairs set in a quiet semicircle. Devin asked questions gently. Malik answered with honesty, never anger. I didn't quit, he said. They just stopped looking at me. He talked about tournaments where referees ignored points, about sponsors who disappeared when he started speaking about lack of diversity, about how, for years, his worth was measured by how little noise he made. What changed? Devin asked. Malik looked around the dojo, the photos of students on the wall, the bulletin board filled with confessions, the echo of kids laughing in earlier classes. I stopped asking to be seen, he said, and I started building what they refused to. The next day, the interview aired in a short segment on a national news site. Comments flooded in. Former fighters reached out. One wrote, I swept a dojo floor in Atlanta for 6 years while wearing a third-degree black belt no one acknowledged. Thank you for showing me I wasn't crazy. Meanwhile, tensions at West Point weren't completely gone. A faction of older members, including a few instructors who had stayed silent for years, began organizing private complaints to the board. They cited Malik's unorthodox methods and non-traditional curriculum. They claimed the dojo had become too political. One of them, a man named Trent Fowler, wrote in his complaint, This is a martial arts school, not a social experiment. When the board requested a meeting with Malik, he arrived with no anger, just facts. He brought a binder. Inside, enrollment numbers, student retention data, competition performance metrics, and, most powerfully, testimonials from families who had returned to martial arts because of the changes. At the end of the presentation, Malik said, If teaching people to confront the world they live in makes this a social experiment, then maybe that's what martial arts should have always been. The board voted to expand his leadership role. Trent Fowler quietly retired. On the day of Malik's departure for the summit, the dojo held an impromptu ceremony. Chase stood up front and said something no one expected. I used to think this place made me a fighter, he began, but it wasn't until Malik humbled me that I realized I had only learned domination, not discipline, not humanity. He turned to Malik. You didn't just teach me to fight better, you taught me to see. The room clapped, not with frenzy, but with depth. Even Tanaka bowed. That night, Malik boarded his flight to Tokyo with a backpack, a laptop, and a hard drive full of voices the world had tried to forget. He wasn't flying in as a guest. He was arriving as a correction. Tokyo greeted Malik with the quiet elegance of rain. It wasn't the postcard version, cherry blossoms and neon signs, but the real Tokyo, people moving in harmony, trains whispering into stations, silence that demanded presence. As his cab pulled into the Imperial Conference Center, the weight of what he carried pressed a little heavier against his chest. Inside, the Global Heritage Summit was already buzzing. Over 500 martial arts masters from 38 countries gathered in pressed uniforms and tailored suits. Some carried the posture of diplomats. Others radiated the stiffness of legacy. Malik entered wearing a plain black jai. No sponsors, no entourage. Just the badge around his neck that read, Speaker, Malik Darrow, United States, Adaptive Combat Philosophy. Some looked at him with polite confusion, others with subtle curiosity. A few, not at all. He was used to all three. He checked into his room and laid out his seminar materials. A USB drive, a printed list of names, a small stack of yellowed news clippings, and a folded photograph of his 1996 championship team. Two of them were gone now. The third, a nurse in Baltimore, had sent her blessing with a voice message. "Tell them we were always here. They just didn't write us down." The next morning, Malik stood backstage as the summit's opening session prepared. The MC, a dignified French Aikido master, read from the program. "Our first presentation today is titled, 'The Invisible Masters, Erased Legacies in Martial Arts History.' Please welcome Malik Darrow." He stepped onto the stage slowly. The auditorium was hushed. He didn't open with credentials. He didn't mention his viral video, his championship belts, or West Point Academy. He simply began with a story. In 1989, a 13-year-old boy from Chicago won his first citywide martial arts tournament. He had no uniform, borrowed shoes. His mother couldn't attend and she worked nights. The boy won anyway. But no photo was taken. His name was never mentioned in the local press. The runner-up, the son of a city official, was featured instead. He paused. "That boy was me." The screen behind him lit up with grainy footage of Black, Latino, and Asian fighters, all mid-motion, all unnamed in their time. "This presentation isn't about bitterness," Malik continued. "It's about acknowledgement. It's about the instructors who trained in basements, the champions who were never invited to coach, the belts denied, the stories buried." He clicked to the next slide, a list of 47 names. "These are just some of the fighters I found. Some are still alive. Some were broken by the silence. All of them were worthy." The room was still. Martial arts is not just about tradition. It's about who we allow into tradition and who we quietly lock out. Then came the documentary. 10 minutes of interviews, vintage footage, voiceovers of forgotten warriors speaking truths that institutions never archived. They said I was too flashy. They meant too black. They said my belt was honorary. It was earned with blood. I taught their champions, but they never called me coach. When the lights came up, Malik simply said, "You can't change history by erasing names. You change it by remembering out loud." He bowed, and for a full beat, nothing happened. Then came the sound. Not thunderous, but full. A standing ovation. Not just from the audience, but from backstage. Several high-ranking masters had stepped into the wings to watch. And now they clapped with their whole bodies. One Japanese grandmaster bowed deeply. "Sensei Darrow," he said in accented English, "you did not restore history. You made it undeniable." After the seminar, Malik was approached by attendees from Brazil, Senegal, the Philippines. A young woman from South Africa wept as she shook his hand. "My brother trained until they pushed him out," she said. "You gave him back to me." A Vietnamese master offered Malik a folded list. "These names," he said, "Vietnamese fighters who taught American GIs, none of them recorded. Would you add them to your archive?" Malik took the list. With both hands. "I will." Back in his hotel that night, Malik read through dozens of messages, some from journalists, others from old competitors. Then came one that stopped him. Subject: West Point Board Meeting Outcome. From Chase Whitmore. To Malik Darrow Sensei. While you were speaking truth in Tokyo, we were speaking truth here. The West Point Board voted to rename our main training hall. It will now be called the Darrow Chamber. Also, the old head coach's retirement was announced. They asked me if I'd accept the position. I declined. Instead, I nominated someone else. I told them it should be you, or no one. Malik exhaled. Not with pride. With responsibility. He stood by the hotel window, Tokyo's skyline glowing in quiet geometry. He thought of the boy in Chicago who won without a photo. He thought of the mats, the silence, the jokes, the broken promises. He thought of every time he bowed and was never bowed to in return. Now, across the world, someone was bowing back. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. The return flight from Tokyo was quiet, but Malik's mind wasn't. As the plane sliced through time zones and clouds, he watched the horizon blur outside the window, wondering how long it would take for change to settle in. Change never came with confetti. It came like bruises healing, slowly, invisibly, until one day, movement no longer hurt. He landed back in Chicago just before dawn. The city was heavy with late winter mist. The airport terminal smelled like old coffee and rain-soaked concrete. He moved through it unnoticed, just another man with a backpack and a mission no one else could see. At West Point Academy, the atmosphere had shifted again. The front entrance was now adorned with a small bronze plaque, Darrow Chamber, in honor of the unseen masters who kept moving forward. Malik stared at it for a moment. He hadn't agreed to the name, but he didn't argue either. Some things weren't about vanity. They were about memory. He walked inside. The floors were spotless. The bulletin board was filled with more student writings than ever before. Some were poems. Others were raw confessions. My father never believed I could fight because I cried too much. Sensei showed me crying wasn't weakness. It was information. I used to hide my scars, now I let them teach me. He doesn't talk loud, but my fear listens when he speaks. In the training hall, Malik found Chase running warm-ups with a group of new students. No arrogance, just intention. The dojo's rhythm had changed, not softer, just clearer. Each motion now carried more than muscle memory. It carried moral memory. Later that day, Malik held his first class since returning. No cameras, no fanfare, just breath, just presence. He began with a story from the summit, speaking about a Cambodian refugee who became a master in secret, teaching children self-defense in rice fields after war took their parents. No medals, no belts, just protection through motion. Martial arts, Malik said, was never just about war. It was always about restoration. He ended the class with something new, an open circle where each student spoke one truth they were never allowed to say in another martial arts space. One girl said, "I hate how silence used to feel like survival." A boy added, "I used to think toughness was the only way I'd be loved." And then, a quiet voice from the back. It was Gregory, a black student who had nearly quit after being mocked at a previous school for his form. "I thought I had to move like them to be worth teaching," he said, "but Sensei taught me that my rhythm is enough." No one clapped. They just nodded. Deeply. That night, Malik met with Tanaka in a modest diner off Roosevelt Road. Over green tea and miso soup, they spoke about the summit, about the invitations pouring in from other schools, from youth centers, from prison programs wanting to bring Malik's curriculum inside. Tanaka smiled softly. "They finally heard you." Malik shook his head. "No, they finally stopped talking over me." They sat in silence for a while. Then Tanaka leaned forward. "What do you want next?" Malik looked out the window. The streets buzzed with people too tired to dream. The very people he had once stood among, sweeping floors with championship hands. "I want to build a second school," he said. Tanaka raised an eyebrow. "Not a franchise," Malik clarified. "A mirror. A dojo in Southside Chicago, free tuition, staffed by former fighters. People who were buried like I was." Tanaka nodded slowly. "And the name?" Malik didn't hesitate. "The recovery mat. For the ones who never got to finish what they started," he said. 2 weeks later, Chase stood at a podium during a regional martial arts conference. Malik had refused the invitation to speak, said the stage should belong to those still proving who they could become. Chase's voice trembled at first, but steadied as he went on. "I used to think a black belt made me untouchable," he said. "But Sensei showed me the truth, that no belt protects you from ignorance. That power without self-interrogation is just dressed-up cowardice." He looked into the crowd. "We don't need more champions," he said. "We need more restorers." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was real. Back at the dojo, Malik taught Darius how to fall. Not how to hit, how to fall. You fall to protect the parts of you that carry truth, he said. We don't fall because we're weak. We fall so we can rise the right way. Darius grinned. That's fire, Sensei. Malik smiled. That's foundation. As the days moved forward, so did the transformation. Instructors from rival schools began visiting for observations. Some left quietly, heads lowered, unsure how to bring Malik's model back home without admitting they had once scoffed at it. Others stayed, asked questions, listened. One evening, during an open house, a man approached Malik. Elderly, in a tweed coat, eyes heavy with guilt. I was on the board when they blacklisted you, he said. Malik didn't speak. I wanted to speak up, but I told myself I had no power. Malik met his gaze. Silence is always a decision. The man looked down. I'm sorry. I know, Malik replied, but I'm not your confessional. The man nodded, tears forming, then left without further words. That night, Malik stood once more in the empty dojo, hands behind his back, staring at the wall where his name now lived. He thought of all the black belts who had never worn theirs. He closed his eyes, bowed, and in the stillness, for the first time in decades, he said softly to himself, I'm home. News of the recovery mat spread faster than Malik anticipated. Before a single mat had been unrolled, before a single student stepped through the door, the idea had already ignited something. Across the South Side, whispers passed between fathers who once fought underground matches, mothers who had been told martial arts weren't feminine, teenagers looking for a language that didn't punish their rage. A single room, free tuition, trained instructors who had been written off, no belt fees, no uniform tax, just movement, just restoration. When the doors opened, the line wrapped around the block. Malik stood by the entrance in a black hoodie, clipboard in hand, shaking each person's hand. Not like a master greeting students, but like a builder welcoming co-architects. Each handshake meant, I see you. Each glance meant, you belong here. Inside, the walls were bare but intentional. No trophies, no glamour shots. Just framed black and white portraits of uncredited martial artists, street fighters, teachers from basements, unknown legends whose names had been gathered during Malik's summit research. Above the main mat, painted in brushstroke calligraphy, we fall to protect what matters. The curriculum was unlike any other. The first 2 weeks weren't about punches or kicks. They were about body ownership. Malik taught classes called Quiet Threats, where students learned how to take up space with posture, not aggression. Another module, Ghost Walk, trained students in how to reclaim control when they'd been made invisible. Through gaze, stance, silence. He invited guest instructors, not celebrities, but people who'd survived. A former inmate who taught lock escapes, a domestic violence survivor who taught breathwork under pressure, a retired dancer who taught how to stay grounded while grieving. Each class ended the same way, in a circle with one question. What part of you showed up today that used to hide? Meanwhile, back at West Point, the changes deepened. The weekly history spotlights had evolved into student-led research. One 12-year-old student, a Haitian girl named Moira, presented a report on her great-grandfather, who had taught self-defense in secret during the Duvalier regime. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Malik stood and bowed to her. You are what legacy looks like when no one deletes the record. The dojo now received requests from schools across the country wanting to replicate the listening circle model. Articles appeared in Martial Digest, The Atlantic, even a feature in the New York Times titled, The Janitor Who Redefined the Dojo. But Malik declined every request to franchise. Let them build their own, he told Chase. The blueprint is already inside them. One afternoon, Malik received a phone call from a hospital in St. Louis. It was regarding Andre, his old teammate, the last surviving member of their 1996 team photo. Andre was dying. Late-stage pancreatic cancer. He'd kept quiet, avoided public life but had seen the Tokyo summit clip from his hospice bed. He talks about you all the time, the nurse said. Says you're still fighting for both of you. Malik made the drive that evening. When he entered the hospital room, Andre was gaunt, skin loose over bone, but his eyes still held the spark of mischief that once made them unstoppable as a tag team pair. You made him remember, Andre rasped, voice gravel. Malik pulled a chair close. I didn't do it alone. Andre coughed, then chuckled, still humble. You always were the quieter fire. They talked for hours, about their first tournament, about the way they used to train with bricks in alleyways, about the time Andre broke a man's nose for calling Malik a charity case. Before Malik left, Andre pulled him close. Tell them, he whispered. Tell the students. We weren't ghosts. We just got locked out of the light. Malik nodded. I promise. Back in Chicago, Malik added a new photo to the wall at the recovery mat. It showed him and Andre, both 16, both defiant, both undefeated. Below it, a handwritten note. They didn't vanish. They were waiting for us to see. One morning, Darius, now a brown belt, approached Malik after class, holding his phone. Sensei, he said, there's a video trending. Malik glanced at the screen. It showed a prominent martial arts influencer mocking Malik's methods, calling them woke performance art, and accusing him of erasing tradition for applause. Should I respond? Darius asked, face flushed. Malik smiled. No need. Why not? Malik turned to the mirror and pointed. Because our response is already moving. That night, a man came to the recovery mat who had driven 4 hours to be there. Mid-40s, heavy set, limping slightly. He stepped onto the mat awkwardly. I haven't trained in 20 years, he said. Was told I was too big, too slow, too something. Malik handed him a belt. You're not too anything, he said. You're just early for your return. And when the man bowed, Malik bowed back, deeply. Then he whispered, let's begin again. Winter rolled into spring with a kind of quiet momentum. At the recovery mat, the walls began to fill, not with awards, but with names. Every student who walked through the doors was invited to write their full name, in their own handwriting, on a long horizontal banner above the mirrors. No belt colors, no ranks, just names. By March, the banner stretched across the entire studio, a living archive of people who had once been told they didn't belong, now staking a permanent claim in the world they were building. Malik called it the unbroken line. One day during a beginner's class, a young girl named Zara refused to step on the mat. She clutched the doorframe, trembling. My old coach yelled when I made mistakes, she said. Said I moved like a girl. Malik knelt beside her. Let's reframe that, he said. You don't move like a girl, you move like Zara. She blinked at him. And Zara is learning. That's all that matters. He walked onto the mat slowly and began to move. Exaggerated steps, off-balance turns, awkward pivots. The students giggled. This, he said, is me, making mistakes. The giggles turned into laughter. Zara stepped onto the mat. Not like a girl, like Zara. That evening, as dusk painted the dojo windows gold, a woman knocked at the door. She looked older than her years, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I'm looking for Mr. Darrow, she said. That's me. She introduced herself as Camille, the daughter of a former competitor named Elijah Red King, a fighter from Malik's early days who vanished from competition after a scandal involving stolen points and a whispered ban. My father died last year, she said. He used to talk about you. Said you were the last real thing he ever saw on a mat. She handed Malik a duffel bag. I found this in his attic. Inside were VHS tapes, handwritten journals, clippings. Personal notes. Thank you, Malik said softly. I thought I was the last one who remembered him. Camille shook her head. You kept him alive long after the world let him go. Malik spent the next 3 days digitizing Elijah's tapes. The footage was grainy, but the technique was undeniable. Raw, rhythmic, full of power and grace. He added Elijah's image to the recovery mat's wall with a small placard, "Elijah Red King, silenced but never broken." He began archiving all the materials he'd collected, from Tokyo, from hospital visits, from boxes left on doorsteps. A digital library called the Archive of the Unacknowledged went live in April. Within days, submissions poured in. A former sensei in Detroit sent video of a black woman leading a karate class in 1972. A student in Brazil uploaded footage of his uncle's forbidden capoeira circle during military dictatorship. An old man in Louisiana emailed a single sentence: "I taught martial arts for 45 years. I was never promoted, but I taught." In May, Malik received an invitation to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award from the United Martial Arts Federation. He declined. Instead, he sent a list of 25 names. People still alive, still ignored. His email ended with, "I don't need a trophy. I need a seat at the table for the ones you keep pretending aren't hungry." One rainy Friday, Malik found himself standing at the back of West Point Academy, watching Darius lead a drill for younger students. Darius now wore a black belt, not because he passed a test, but because his movements had become memory and his teaching reflected truth. Malik hadn't awarded it. The students had. They voted, unanimously. Malik asked Darius afterward how he felt. "Like my body finally caught up with my spirit," he said. That night, Malik walked through the empty halls of the recovery mat. He stopped at the wall of names, ran his fingers across the banner. Each signature was a story, a resistance, a survival. He thought of the man he was when he mopped dojo floors with cracked hands and unspoken brilliance. The man who bowed to boys who mocked him, who held his silence like it was a virtue. He thought of that first spar with Chase, how it wasn't about domination but permission. Permission to be seen. Permission to remind the world that what's quiet isn't weak. It's just gathering. He turned off the lights. The mats glowed faintly in the dark, a cathedral of recovery. And somewhere, in another city, a girl watched the old viral video of Malik slipping under Chase's punch, his body balanced in truth, and whispered to herself, "I think I want to move like that. Not to fight, but to be free." In the end, Malik Darrow didn't reclaim what was taken from him. He built what had never been allowed to exist. A space where falling was sacred, where silence could speak, where power was not about who struck first, but who stood last with their integrity intact. The janitor who once swept around belts he wasn't allowed to wear became the architect of a generation no longer willing to beg for entry. He didn't burn down the old dojo. He rewrote the blueprints, and in doing so, he left behind not just a story, but a structure, one that says, "You were never too loud, too soft, too anything. You were always enough. They just didn't have the courage to see it until now."